Now we're live. Okay, there we go. Welcome. I don't know if it recorded any of that or
No.
thanks to do so
No.
probably got cut off, but we're here again Tuesday night. Thanks for joining. And as always, we are we are a live broadcast, so we really do encourage questions. I Tonight is going to be the official first night of a new series, and I've got quite a list of topics. Tonight's kind of an easy one. But basically, I have compiled a list of what I think are some decent, or not decent, common, and hopefully concise, not just all over the place, arguments against Christianity, and basically things that people might commonly hear or struggle with from the standpoint of, whether Christianity is the real thing, whether it's more than just some other religion, what makes it different, why is, you know, to quote our God, why is our God the right one, the real one? How do we know? Dealing with things like hypocrisy and evil in the world and, yeah, stuff like that. And so I'm going to be working this through. Hopefully, it'll be helpful. I believe it will be helpful for folks in general. I had talked about it last week. If you know somebody that's, you know, dealing or has an argument on the other side, and you see the titles coming up, I encourage you to send them a link or invite them to your house, over your house to watch these and give them an opportunity to kind of unload some questions and get real answers, which is what we're all about. So tonight, the title is Christians Are No Fun. This stems from a conversation with a guy at work that I had a conversation with. He's not a Christian. He's never been religious. He was raised Catholic until a young age, and then he kind of wasn't just that's just who they were as a family. He wasn't necessarily devout or anything like that, but his mom was Catholic or is Catholic, and so we were talking about Christianity and the potential of him becoming a Christian, and he said, why does it always have to come down to giving up things you want to do? And so that was kind of the spark of the thought, and so I had this kind of in the back of my mind, and then another conversation with another guy, similar situation, except he has a religious background, and he said, if I really do this, if I really commit myself, am I going to be held down? And he said, how come I can't, have a glass of wine here and there, and so, from my perspective, I have experienced something pretty powerful that made me not want to do those things. It wasn't that somebody told me these are the rules you need to follow, but from the outside perspective, I think it's actually a valid question to be answered. Uh, you know, here's the argument, Christians live restricted, chaste, and boring lives devoid of freedom. And so, in way of kind of an introduction, I once held an interesting view of the ocean. And when my wife and I first got married, that was I was incredibly petrified of sharks. I'd never been deep in the ocean before. I would swim in waves and stuff like that, but never very deep. And so when I got married, I scheduled this kayaking slash snorkeling trip, and it was like an all day thing. It was going to be with a guide and like one other couple, and so it was a very small group of people. And so we get there, and I could not, my wife wouldn't know this part of it. When I scheduled this thing, I was actually making a decision consciously. I'm going to face my fears, and I'm just going to go get in the water because I knew we were going to go deep. And so, at least deep enough to snorkel and kayak in the ocean. And so I'm thinking, man, ocean, I know it's Hawaii, I get it, but you gotta think about where I'm coming from. I was afraid of sharks. I was afraid of eels with gazillions of teeth, poisonous fish, not to mention unpredictable waters, currents, waves, all that stuff legitimately kind of scared me. And so I grew up near the rough parts of the Pacific Ocean, and the things we would hear about people in crazy waters was they'd drown.
Mm-hmm.
And so we heard a lot about stuff like that. And every time you got close to the water, you couldn't see inside the water. So everything was just so unknown. And when we went on this kayaking trip, we went with a real guide. This guide was, He's a local. This is why I was looking up the word seafarer. This guy, you can tell he grew up on the ocean. He grew up on the waters. He knew the fish. He knew what to do, where to go, what to eat, what not to eat. And he introduced us to this just whole different world. And so we go out on these kayaks, and we're probably, I don't know, several hundred yards off the shore, but the waters are still very calm. It's the southern shore of Maui. It's very, very calm, very clear. I'd never seen water that clear before that wasn't fresh. And so we go out, and he says, does anybody want to see a shark? And everybody says no, except me. So I'm like, I'm doing this. I'm facing my fear, man. I'm not going to be afraid of sharks anymore. And so he says, there's a shark in this cave. I'm going to go down in this cave. I'm going to pull him out. And I'm like, this dude's a crazy nutcase. We're going to have to get in the kayaks and go back by ourselves because he's going to get eaten. So in my mind, I'm working all this stuff out in my mind. You know, he's a nutcase. He really was he was a crazy guy. You would consider him like a crazy Hawaiian. But he goes down there, he disappears in this cave, and all of a sudden this massive shark comes barreling out. I mean, real slow, real lazy-like, just kind of, and I was like, I can't even believe that just happened. He comes out of the cave after me, comes up, and he's holding his shoulder. He goes, I tried to grab him by the fin, and he kicked and threw my shoulder out. I'm just going to hang out in the kayak. You guys swim around. And so, you know, just the whole experience to me was like, I don't have anything to be afraid of. And so you gotta picture this, going from never having been deep in the ocean before to going to something and experiencing something like that. The colors, the numbers of incredibly pretty fish, and just the whole environment to me was so amazing. And I fell in love with the ocean properly. Yeah. And so what I experienced was what it was really like to be in the beautiful parts of the ocean. And so from the outside perspective, I never would have experienced that until I actually fully got in, pun intended. And so, like I said, these conversations are valid from an outside perspective. But so let's try to bring that mindset or that argument inside of Christianity. Yeah. Why do Christians live such boring lives? Why can't they just be people who have fun and do the things they want to do? Why does God take the fun away? Okay, so a couple scriptures that to me just seem like there must be something wrong or miscommunicated here is Proverbs 17:22. A joyful heart is good medicine. And this is coming from a believer. But a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Psalm 16:11. You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. So this doesn't sound, neither one of these scriptures sound like people who don't know what it means to have fun. Yeah. And so either there is a misunderstanding, well, that's just probably a couple options here. There's a misunderstanding from the outside perspective, a miscommunication from the inside, or both.
Well, yeah. I mean, it could be both. But I think more than anything else, really, it's funny to me is my experience. I reference it a lot, and having been around for a while, now, today, my experience is fairly unique because there's not a lot of people who grew up in a non-religious family. That is literally, so the reason why I bring that up now is because it's important to understand one of my beginning conversations about Christianity with this friend of mine who'd become a Christian. Now, he was into Eastern mysticism, kind of religious-y, kind of a guy. He was into martial arts, and it was the whole, body, soul, and spirit. He was really into that whole idea. And so he did martial arts, different forms of martial arts, but he was really into the religion of martial arts as well. So it's a lot like, what do you call it, Karate Kid, it's like he was Mr. Miyagi, I mean, that was he really was like that, although he wasn't working at a name escapes me. Well, yeah, he wasn't, Dojo.
Yeah.
I couldn't get it out of my mouth.
I was like, that's an easy one.
I couldn't get it out of my mouth. It wouldn't
almost didn't recommend it because I was like, there's no way it's dojo.
Yeah, it wouldn't come. Yeah. So he just, but he taught it. He actually ended up writing a book about it. But so the reason I bring that up is because, so here's this guy, and then he becomes a Christian. So I lived with him before. We were sharing a trailer together because it was close by where we worked. And so I moved in with him when I started working for that company, and so just basically was to try to save money and get myself going, and so that was our lives, you know. I mean, I smoked pot, I drank, I partied. He didn't care about any of that. He was into taking mushrooms. He only did natural drugs. He never did synthetic drugs, and that was his thing. And so he took mushrooms instead of cocaine, and in pot instead of anything else. And but the point that I'm making is, so I have this. So he knows me, I know him. He becomes a Christian, and I'm like not into Christianity because of my childhood experience with Christianity, of being invited to a Christian church that was, probably I shake my head and talk about I think about how horrible it is, but probably how most people have been raised, very typical, church kids, all playing kid games, and no real experience with the world around them, just raised in sort of in a bubble, and any sin that they've committed has always been hiding from their parents, where I grew up in a home where, I didn't have to hide anything. And so I'm smoking pot, he's telling me about Jesus. And I just came right out and I said, so what's wrong with smoking pot? You're going to tell me that as a Christian I can't smoke pot? What's wrong with smoking pot? And he says, it's wrong. And the thought that was in my mind was, he's right. I know it's wrong. That's all there is to it. At the time, it's, since then it's been, quote, made a misdemeanor. It's not quite legal, but it might as well be for all intents and purposes. The fines are so small. But the idea of it being wrong was very clear. And it wasn't just the legality of it. It was wrong. I knew that what I was doing to myself limited my ability to be able to function. I couldn't get high and go to work, for example. I wouldn't be able to perform as well. And so things like that. If you're working a job where you're working as a garbage man or something like that, you probably could do it. But if you're working as administration or something like that, smoking pot's just it's not something you can do and do that as well. And so I knew it was wrong. That was the thing, is I knew it was wrong. And I thought, that was a dumb question. Why did I ask him that? I knew it was wrong. So here's the foundation that I'm starting with here of answering this question is, I don't understand when people say why does God want to limit our fun? Why is it so difficult for them to see that it's just that the limits are just the wrong of the limits? It's not all fun, it's wrong. Things that are enjoyable that are wrong, though. Things that are detrimental to yourself or to other people. The classic, I don't hurt anybody. Most sin hurts either yourself or somebody else directly. Directly. There's no getting around that. And the little bit that's left over, like somebody who says, well, how come I can't enjoy a glass of wine every now and then? Well, I've never met anybody who has ever had a problem, like when I've talked about not drinking and because I'm a Christian, I've never had anybody say to me, well, what's wrong with me having just a glass of wine, if they were just having a glass of wine. And the ones that always say that are the ones that are drinking, they're binge drinking, and then saying, what's wrong with having only a glass of wine? And it's like, that's not what you do, so let's not even talk about that. And I actually, when I was in Gibraltar, there was a guy who, he had a glass of wine with dinner as a Christian. And he said, I don't want to cause you to stumble because I know you don't drink. And he said, but in Gibraltar, all the Christians drink. It's not a problem. And I told him, I said, I don't have a problem if you drink. That's on you. This is between you and God, and so he orders a glass of wine and he never finished it. Well, why do you think he never finished it? Because he felt guilty drinking a glass of wine in front of me. That's why he didn't do it. It's like, I can't do this in front of him. Why? Because it's wrong. you know, and it's like not that it's wrong in general. He can go into his house and justify it all he wants, but he can't justify it in front of somebody who says drinking's not wrong, even though he doesn't believe drinking is wrong. That's the point that I'm making is that people who often say this about, fun, when they talk about God limiting all of our fun, is that's what they're talking about. They're talking about he doesn't, God isn't allowing us to do things that are wrong, and that just makes sense, that God wouldn't allow us to do things that are wrong. So it isn't that, that things that we like to do, we can't do. It's the things that we like to do that are wrong that we can't do. So I'm only talking non-Christian here. I'm not even bringing it into the realms of becoming a Christian yet, but yeah.
Yeah. So what would be the impression that would that people would get from the outside perspective that would cause them to think that? I mean, so talking about non-Christians, like, what is the thing that makes them see it that way?
They see Christians. Okay, so a couple of reasons, probably. One of them, which is not a good one, and that is a wrong approach, is those who say, I can't. I'm a Christian, so I can't do that. And the implication is I would do it, if it didn't mean being a bad Christian, I would do it. And so there's that. But the other, which I think is more the case, is that they look at what Christians do. And because what Christians do for fun, isn't fun to non-Christians, they think, well, why would I want to become a Christian? I would, I'd be doing these kinds of things, and there's nothing fun about them. And so I'd say those are the reasons why.
So from the thing that has kind of the example part of this, because the first one you mentioned that's not, you said isn't a good one, is an interesting one, because there are a lot of, quote unquote churched people that have gone, to the dark side of things, and they're like, they are the partiers, they are the people who I used to be, or they're, in their minds, they're still right with God because they have this foundation of church, and they still live the same way as everybody else.
Yeah, but it's not even foundation. They've just, like I said the other day in my sermon, is Jesus is just a seasoning. He's a flavor that you add to your life. Jesus isn't their life. He's not their. They don't love him. They will claim they love him, but I'll tell you that if I had to marry somebody who loved like that, I would see if there's any way out of it. I wouldn't marry them, because I know what they mean. What they mean is I love you as long as you do what I like. But if you don't do what I like, then I'm not gonna love you. And that's just not love, at all. There's nothing loving about somebody who's just focused on themselves.
So a question that's come in is, you knew you were doing wrong. Do you think others know they're wrong?
Well, see, that's the big question. Is that the reason why I set it up the way that I did, of talking about being a non-Christian, upbringing, being from a non-Christian upbringing. There was nobody to tell me right and wrong. I had to figure out right and wrong, and I should say, any internal right and wrong. That's already been pre-established by God. Others may not think so, but it is. It's there. And that's why I said it that way. Is even as a non-Christian, inside of me, I knew I was wrong. And I believe that is, well, the issue, the difficulty of the question is that I do believe that everybody knows when they're doing wrong. It's just that there are a lot of people that have the capacity to ignore that. And the immediate right or wrong, switch in their mind has been deactivated through repetition. I don't want to know what's wrong. I want to know what's fun, and that's really where I think many people are today. Is that if it's fun, then they justify doing wrong, and then tell themselves it's not wrong. How can it, like the old song, how can it be wrong if it feels so right?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's an interesting thought, because the feeling of good is what kind of defines a lot of times what is fun and what's not fun,
Well,
right?
I would say exclusive, not well, maybe not exclusively, but I would say, that is the case. We decide what's fun by feeling. Yeah,
But it is.
we
I
do.
mean, so like
We
that.
do, but and which is the funny thing is that being a Christian and living clean and living right and living according to the way that God says, well, maybe we'll wait on that. I'll leave that
Oh,
a
I
little
thought you
bit
were going
later
that
on.
direction.
I'll leave that for
Okay.
later on.
So okay, let's talk about this idea because the question here actually mentions something I was going to go into.
Yeah.
Is I've assumed wrong is normal to them or not wrong if that's all they know or were raised in. So
Well, that's my point.
Yeah.
Is that if you were taught something was okay when you were growing up, then then you wouldn't need to worry about anything. I could understand the conflict of why don't Christians do this, because I was raised knowing this was okay. But that's the thing is I was raised in a non-Christian home, and in that non-Christian home, I was taught non-Christian right and wrong, just societal right and wrong. And so society said there were things I could do. Nobody ever told me, never one time did anybody ever tell me, my parents included, never told me that having sex before I was married was wrong. There wasn't even the slightest idea. But I had the biggest problem when it came down to the first time that I had sex, because I felt like I was crossing a threshold. I felt like this is wrong. But it was like, but nobody's ever told me this is wrong. And I know lots of people are doing this, my friends in school and different people I knew that were doing that. And it was like, nobody ever told me that was wrong.
did that feeling stay?
What, after I,
Yeah. So like.
after I had sex, I thought, why is this wrong? Not, it's not wrong, but I don't know why it's wrong. And it just kind of stayed there. It wasn't a thing where I just said this is right and I should have this with everybody I feel like having sex with. It wasn't that kind of a thing. The idea of having sex with somebody here and then going to somebody there and going to somebody there and somebody there and somebody there and somebody there. It was something that I did, but I didn't do it thinking it was right to do that. I did it knowing that it was wrong to do that. I didn't care. I didn't care that it was wrong, but I knew that it was wrong. And that's the point. I think that is a very, very important point, is that most of the stuff that we do that are wrong, we learn how to not care about doing it. But it isn't a question of whether it's now right to do that. It's not all of a sudden in your mind this is the right thing to do. No, it isn't. Sorry.
So do you
Doesn't
think
work
when
like
people
that.
say, "I think this is okay. I think this is fine. This isn't wrong," do you think that so they're doing things that are either scripturally or morally?
Well, they're justifying. Yeah,
Do you
they're
think that they're being
justifying.
dishonest? In
Well, I
saying
do
that?
believe there's a dishonesty involved in it. Yeah, I do. I do believe there's a dishonesty involved. I don't believe that somebody just really says, "Wow, I didn't have any idea that this was wrong at all." It's like, I just don't buy that. And because I've had so many conversations with people that if I'll take the time, which is usually a waste of time, if I take the time and become Dave the lawyer, and I take them to court and I take them to task over it, they know it's wrong. It's not a question of whether it's wrong or not. The issue is they just want to do it, And so you have to justify, or you have to silence the conviction about it, because we have a conscience, and our conscience will get in the way of our fun. So we have to do something to kill our conscience, which you can do. You are able to do that by, like I said, by justification, compartmentalizing. There's all kinds of different ways that you can silence your conscience so that you can do what you want to do and have fun. But the one thing which I didn't know this at all, and I don't think anybody really knows this until you become a Christian, is that I didn't realize that that's why I was experiencing the consequences in my life that I was experiencing. Because there's a payday for doing wrong. It's built into doing wrong. It's a payday that comes.
Give me an example of that.
Well, it's just the way the universe was created. There's a payday if you jump off of a 4-story out of a 4-story window. there's an automatic payday for everybody. There isn't some people that nothing happens to them. There's always some kind of consequences. The consequences are different for different people.
Well, give me an example of something that's more,
Well, it's all like
I'm
that.
doing something pleasurous, not
It's all
not
like
I
that.
want to harm myself.
No. It's all like that. It's all like
No,
that.
I know. I see why you're using the example. I'm just saying, like, give me an example of something that's a pleasure that is leading to a bad payday.
Okay, well, let's get super controversial. Let's just jump right out into the deep ocean here. The whole argument over abortion, there would be no argument over abortion if people just did what was right and not what felt good. We wouldn't even be talking about abortions because nobody would be getting pregnant inadvertently. It's if you're not having sex, nobody's getting pregnant. And if you get married and you have sex and something goes wrong, we're not going to be talking about the need to have abortions, because of course if you're in a situation to where you're genuinely life threatened, you're going to know that in the beginning stages. You'll probably either know that before you get pregnant, or you're going to know it early on in the early stages of your pregnancy. And then at that point, okay, something has to be done. But it's not going to be a debate. There aren't going to be people pro-life and nobody. I don't know. There may be, but I doubt that there's any Christian anywhere. Well, let me put it this way: I have never met a Christian anywhere that believes that that the baby's life should be take precedent over the mother's life. If it comes down to a genuine choice between one or the other, not life quality, just whether you're alive or not, then you're not gonna. So you're not gonna have that kind of an argument, when it comes to that. There's not gonna be anybody anywhere who says, oh no, you have to think about the life of the baby, as well as the life of the mother, because the mother dying, can the baby still make it? Well, technically. But not without great, difficulty, because there's no mother to take care of it, and mothers are meant to take care of babies. I know a lot of this stuff is, for many people, considered old-fashioned, but the owner's manual for humans still says the same thing. It's never changed. Is that women are the ones who have babies. Men do not have babies.
Did not know that.
Huh?
Did not know that. Okay, so what about this
There are some
idea?
people that don't.
What about this idea that? Never mind. I just remembered something you said. Okay. I wish we could. We should come up with a way to play video clips. We should totally do.
Oh,
that.
that'd be easy.
There's got to be a way we could do that.
Easy
there's
to do.
gotta
We couldn't do it.
actually,
We couldn't do it in a. I mean, it's just we'd have.
It
to
wouldn't
go
be
get
ad
them.
hoc. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
We should have
But
some,
doing
because
it's
we do
not
like
a
a lot of
problem.
talk shows. Actually, have people in
Yes.
the background and say, "Hey, pull up that video." We
Yeah,
should
yeah,
totally
yeah.
have. We got Elliot. You gotta. If you're
Yeah.
listening to this, we gotta have Elliot volunteer. Somebody's got to
He's
volunteer for this.
Busy on other things.
So okay, what about this idea that everybody's doing it? You know what I mean? Like there's like we live in a society.
that still
Everybody's
doesn't.
doing
We're
it.
still not talking about some. We're not talking about something's whether right or wrong. We're just talking about whether people are doing it or not. We're still playing this same game. Is that the issue? Is I want to be able to do what's wrong. And then I can hear the who's to say it's wrong. Well, that's the silly thing about it, is you're the one to say that it's wrong, and it's wrong, but you're justifying because you want to do it because it's fun. And we just have to face facts when it comes to that. And I think many people would be surprised that that if they genuinely had things in their lives that they genuinely wanted to do, that were not wrong, that it has nothing to do with whether or not they can be a Christian.
So another question's come in. Do you think people are addicted to independence or control? I have the right to do whatever I want. Quote.
Well, there's all kinds of these are that's just part of the bag of excuses. There's tons of excuses as to why, and rights are one of them. But that still doesn't. This is the thing is that you can do all the yelling and screaming that you want about, and use whatever excuse you want. But at the end of the day, You know you're wrong. And when you stand before God, you're going to admit that. You're not going to just go, oh, I didn't know it was wrong. I honestly didn't know it was wrong. I wouldn't have done it if I knew it was wrong. Nobody's going to do that. It's just not going to happen. We know. And how could God hold us accountable to something that, which is, I mean, there's, it's funny, all these Christian weirdos, that there are in the world. I can think of these handfuls of Christians over here who will say that this is and that's and the other things, but how can you expect God to hold us accountable to things that we genuinely don't know are wrong? Why would God do that? Why would God allow you to just believe with all your heart without any nothing whatsoever contradicting you in any way? I just thought this was right. I just thought it was the right thing to do. How could God hold us in account for something like that? And it's like, God, I didn't know. There was no indication. There was absolutely zero information that this was wrong. And he says, well, sorry, ignorance is no excuse. You're going to hell for all eternity. You'll know it's wrong. You'll see where you've been warned, how you've been warned, and there'll be no excuse.
So this is a question that could go on a slight tangent, but I think it's worth asking, is that why do we have the ability to desire wrong in the first place?
Well, it's not, which the whole concept, see, this is the funny thing, we're kind of not going in that direction, so I'll just do it anyway. The whole idea, when I became a Christian, looking backwards at my life, my summary of my life was that it was a waste of space. But before, I didn't think that way. I didn't think that my life was a waste of space. I was only 20 years old. How could I have become a waste of space, forever, by the time I'm 20 years old? I'd been out of the house 2 years and hadn't really experienced much outside of my parents' home. And so, driving for 4 years, and I did, get around. I did went places. I traveled a little bit. I went from Arizona to California and Texas and things. But the thing I'm saying about this is that while I was living those years, I had fun. I was doing things. I was enjoying life. I was, doing things that were wrong and having fun doing them. But after I became a Christian, I thought, boy, what a deception. I can't, nothing else is coming to mind, but what a deception to believe that there was nothing better than what I was experiencing, that life couldn't get any better than what my experience was. And yet just simply going to church one night, and asking Jesus to reveal himself to me, and that if he would, I would surrender my entire life to him. And then doing that, and then realizing in that next morning, just waking up and going to work, even though nothing had actually happened to me, I was already happier and more joyful than I had ever been doing anything. So now I have so here's my benchmark of happiness, somewhere down here, and then every now and then I'm having happy times, and then going back to this low benchmark. And then all of a sudden I wake up after I've asked Jesus to make himself real to me. I told him I was willing to surrender. And now I'm starting here with happiness and joy. That this is the benchmark. Getting up in the morning is more happier than all the things that I did, before I became a Christian. And it's like, what a shallow, empty existence it is without God. And it was very clear that was life without God. It's very shallow, very, very empty. A lot of periods of time of contemplating how why isn't there any more to life than this? Why is this all there is? And it doesn't matter what you achieve in life. There's always that thought of, but isn't there more? Isn't there any more? And it doesn't even matter what you You could achieve, you could become the richest man in the world, and you're still thinking, isn't there any more than this? I mean, yeah, okay, I'm the richest man in the world, but isn't there any more? I mean, is this it? Am I at the top? And it's not, the idea of this, you know, obsession with it is my, it's the idea of, is this all there is? I mean, I've gotten here, and this isn't a whole lot different than before I had all these things. It's different scenario, different people, different toys, more expensive, those kinds of things. Different drugs if you're into drugs, more expensive drugs, more expensive parties, more expensive, excursions, travels. You're going to Europe and here and there, and but in all that, it's like there's still that thought of, well, it's not, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And the night after I became a Christian, all of a sudden I'm past all that. I've already passed it all. I've already found that there's something more, by simply the virtue of the fact that I just asked Jesus to make himself real to me, and in making himself real to me, that answered the question, is there something more to life than this? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. And so the idea of limitations, or blowing, your fun, it's like I don't have to do anything to achieve the fun that other people can only achieve by doing things. I don't have to. I'm already at a level of joy and happiness that goes beyond what they can achieve by doing drugs or going on vacation or going here or going there. It's not the same. It's not,
Well, we were going to go that direction.
Oh, okay.
Kind of cut through the argument a little bit here. I think next time I'm just going to stop you short and say, hold on, man, we're going to get there. But I'll still ask these other questions.
Yeah, ask them and I'll fill in.
Because, so this is still kind of from the perspective of like from the outside. So, and then I'm going to talk a little bit, ask another question kind of more on the inside. But what is, when the Bible talks about things that are revealed to some and not to others, and there's a bunch of scriptures that refer to this, it's been revealed to you and then not to them.
Right.
So, but how is it that they could see? So now we're talking about the appeal of Christianity, right? So Jesus is preaching. He's talking about the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about going to heaven. He's talking about a heavenly Father. He's talking about, life in this life and the next. He's talking about the whole thing. Yeah. And, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. I'll give you rest. He's making this huge appeal, and he does it throughout his entire, 3 years of, public stage ministry, we'll call it. And he can still say that there are people listening to him who they have not yet seen or heard the things he's trying to teach and preach. And so what is he talking about? Is that something, different than what it really means to be a Christian, the joys of being a Christian and a follower of Jesus, and that's the reason why they didn't follow him? Or, what is it he's talking about that hasn't been revealed to them? Especially if, the ideas of living the right way are already known, but they're clearly being rejected for one reason or another.
Well, no, the difference between life isn't just about what's right and what's wrong. Mm-hmm. That's binary. We're going into binary land, and it's like, everything is right or wrong, and if you know everything that's right, then you're going to just always be a happy person. It's like, no, that's not, that's not even close to the truth, because knowing that something is right and not wanting to live that way isn't living wrong. It's, sometimes it's just being lazy, and lazy can be detrimental, but lazy isn't wrong. It's not a sin. That if you're lazy, okay, that's, you're sinning, and you've committed the sin of laziness, so you're not going to heaven. It's not that kind of a thing. So you can't be so binary about it. It's not so black and white that you just, if you know what, So the idea of things being, the way that God reveals is, it's very interesting for me personally. I enjoy and appreciate that God isn't like that, that it isn't binary, that there isn't just this watershed moment where all of a sudden all the truths of Christianity come barreling down upon us. It's always, to him who has more will be given. That's the feature, and to him who doesn't have even that which he has will be taken away from him. And so there's an understanding that when you choose that you want to experience pleasure your way, and you don't care about whether it's wrong or not, but you're gonna experience it your way. Well, there's no point in God, giving you more. What would be the point? I mean, it's funny. Sometimes you tell people, hey, this is a really great thing. You should do it. And they're like, no, it doesn't sound like fun to me. Or it's something to eat, something to eat. And you say, oh, it tastes really good. You got to understand, this tastes really great. You got to eat it. And they go, oh, I'm not really interested. I won't. There's no point in having a conversation about what makes it so good.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want it. They're not interested. It doesn't fit their appetite. They have an appetite for other things. And so they have to, that's why the Bible says, blessed are those that hunger and thirst, for they shall be filled. Because you've got to create an appetite. You've got to develop an appetite. That's why, when kids are young, why parents are, try to force feed them. You have kids that when they're young and their parents don't try to force feed them, then they just eat garbage. They're eating everything that tastes good, and they won't eat anything that's healthy for them because they won't even try it. It's like, no way, no. I already have a standard for what I think is good, and this tastes terrible. I'm never going to eat it. But they're comparing it to, to something that's been, dipped in chocolate or,
Yeah.
So my point in that is just there's no God revealing he's revealing stuff to those who have an appetite for the things of God. If they don't have an appetite for the things of God, then they won't have that.
Mm-hmm.
They just won't have that revelation.
Okay, so how does a Christian, a real Christian, handle the desire for something that is wrong? Or does it even exist? Is when you become a Christian that just goes away? Or?
No, it doesn't just go away. There are things called temptation. And in temptation, you are tempted. But what I've learned over the years is temptation is not necessarily, well, as you mature as a Christian, temptation is not something that you want to do. It's something that is being forced upon you. Jesus isn't thinking about climbing up on the temple and throwing himself off. The devil is tempting him to do that. This is not something where he's thinking, I've always been thinking about doing that. I thought about jumping off the temple. That was not what was going on. He wasn't sitting there thinking about that. And all of the temptations that Jesus went through are not there. It's not that the devil was, or that Jesus was just struggling with, I want to do these things, and the devil going, yeah, you should do it. It's not that kind of a thing. These are things that there's this almost this imposition, and this justification, like he says, if you do this, people will know that you're the Son of God, and things like that, and the benefits, all that kind of stuff. Is he's fabricating a lie, that he's trying to get us to believe. But for some people who are immature, spiritually speaking, they already want to do those things. Like Eve at the tree, the knowledge of good and evil. She already wants to eat from the tree before the devil even comes along. And so he doesn't have to do a whole lot. All he has to do is just throw a few things out there, 2 sentences, and she's eating from the tree. And because she wants to, she already wanted to. This wasn't something that she was like, oh no, I don't think this is a good idea. She wanted to. And that's where a lot of people are, including, I don't even know if I'd call them Christians, to be honest. People like that, they have a desire to sin, and then the devil comes along and tempts them to sin. I don't know that I'd call them Christians, to be honest, because it's really hard to justify, the desire the desire to sin after you become a Christian. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
So what about Christians that seem what's the explanation behind Christians, believers, people who, they go to church, they read their Bibles, they, have the disciplines, they don't drink, they don't smoke, they're not, sleeping around, they might even be married and have families and, be doing the, we'll call it the straight life.
Mm-hmm.
They're living that lifestyle, but they just don't seem happy. They don't, they don't put out
Well,
this,
that's what
I'm
I'm talking
happy,
about.
I'm joyful, I'm really glad I'm saved, I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, I have something other people don't. They seem so miserable.
Yeah, because they want to sin. They can't. Which again, are they really Christians? Just because you do what Christians do doesn't make you a Christian. It's funny. We used to all the time the drama. We were involved in drama teams for our Saturday night music concert scenes, and we do these little dramas. They're like 5 minutes long, and the number of times, and the number of different ways, to communicate that. There was a guy who came out as a chicken, and he's going, "Walk, walk, walk, walk," and all this kind of stuff, and there are two guys that are talking. He says, "Look at him, he's a chicken." It's like he's not a chicken, because they were having it before. They were having a conversation about serving God, and he's, "Oh, I'm a Christian. I go to church, blah blah blah." And this guy comes out, and so the Christian uses that as an example, and he says, he spends most of his time in the hen house. He eats with the rest of the chickens. He hangs out with them. He's a chicken. And the other guy goes, "No, he's not. He's not a chicken." He says, "You can eat chicken food. You can live in a hen house. That doesn't make you a chicken." He said, "Exactly. That doesn't make you a Christian. Just because you go to church, you read the Bible, you pray, you do all these things, and that I think the biggest indicator should be, that you are miserable, that should be your indicator that you're not a Christian and that you're just wasting your time. You should, and I do tell people this, is I tell them you should go sin, you should go do the things you want to do because you're miserable and you're probably not going to heaven anyway. So you might as well enjoy this life and go to hell rather than not enjoy this life and also go to hell.
I didn't say this. We're at 7:47. So every podcast we do, open it up for off-topic questions right at 8 o'clock. And so if you have any off-topic questions, one's already come in, so I've marked that down. But if you have anything that's off-topic, it has nothing to do with this, I will actually,
One or two.
There's one. There's another one that hasn't popped up on my screen yet. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed this one. Forgive me, I should have worn my glasses, and I'm not. It's not helping either way. So, after receiving, this is actually another question. I apologize. I totally missed this. After receiving Jesus in your life, was there ever a time that you wanted to go back to your old life? There are people who experience God and still turn back.
I would say, okay, first of all, I would say that there are people who experience God, but I wouldn't say that's the same thing as getting saved. They experience God, but that doesn't mean anything when it comes right down to it. I was just thinking the other day about somebody who I know who's been in and out of church for years, and the thought crossed my mind is I've seen them when they're supposedly backslidden, they've gone back into the world, and I've seen them in the church, and they're no different. It's not like they come in and change, and become some other kind of a person. They just start coming to church, and then when they get tired of it, they go back out, and so that's not what happened to me. I didn't experience that. So that's, I think, the first thing is the idea that experiencing God is somehow equal to salvation, or at least the opportunity for salvation. It's not, experiencing God. A lot of people experienced Jesus in the first century, and a lot of people didn't want to have anything to do with him, but they knew who he was. And, even his family wasn't too keen on the idea of him thinking he was a Messiah. and which is ironic because you look at his mom and all the the prophecies and things that she was told visitations from angels, but still that didn't make her a Christian. It's like this is ridiculous. It wasn't until later on that she became a Christian. And so the reason why I'm prefacing it that way is the answer is no. There's never been a time where I thought about going back because there's nothing to go back to. There is no going back. The way the Bible describes it, going back is like a dog returning to its vomit. Now I can't, I'm going to be a bit gross here, but I can't imagine anybody telling me after they've thrown up into a plate and ate it a second time, no, 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 I was wrong. This is better. This is better than it was when it was first cooked. But that's what happens. That's exactly what happens. Is you're eating you're eating, out of a garbage can, and then you get saved, and God begins to show you what real food's like, and then you decide you're gonna go back to the garbage, and it's like, sorry, that's why would I want to do that? Why would I want to go back to the garbage? I couldn't imagine. I used to work at Burger King. We'd have these homeless people that would come and raid our trash cans in the back, and they'd climb over everything. We didn't matter what we did. They would climb over the walls. They'd do anything they could to get in the trash can so they can get the hamburgers we threw away. And it's like, I couldn't imagine being like that. And then you get a good job, you get yourself together a little bit, and you start eating good, and you're living in a good place. Going, you know what, this sucks, man. Dumpster diving was so much funner. It's just not realistic. It's not realistic. It doesn't mean that people don't end up there, and the reason why people don't end up back, or what the reason why people end up back there is the same reason why Christians end up back in the world, is that they never really got it. They never really understood the opportunity before them. Here you are. You're taking care of yourself now. You're not having to eat out of garbage cans anymore. Something should click in your mind that says, you know what, I never want to go back there ever again. But that's not. It doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. This is cool. It's great. And as long as it lasts, I'll enjoy it. But if it ever goes away, well, I can always go back to dumpster diving. And that's how many people become, quote, experienced and go back into the world. Is they still have a taste for dumpster food.
So there's a story that this is kind of my last question here, and then we'll close up and we'll open it up for off-topic questions. But there was a story about I read this and then I actually heard it. There was a interview with this pastor in he's Jim Cymbala. He talks about this because his church, in the Bronx, it ended up blowing up. Tons of people came to this church. People started giving their lives to Jesus, and they had a testimony going on. A woman that was giving her testimony, and towards the end of the service, a homeless guy walks in. He walks right up the center aisle, and Jim Cymbala is pretty used to this kind of thing, and so in his mind, he's like, man, I really want to deal with this right now. He's, from his own, his own admission, he's saying, I just was tired. It'd been a long night, been praying for people at a really long service, and the guy walks up. Before he even got close to him, I could smell him. I could smell urine and sweat, and so this guy walks up, and Jim Cymbala just to kind of hurry the whole thing up, he just pulls out his wallet and pulls some money out, and he's going to hand it to the guy, and the guy pushes his hand back, says, I don't want your money. I want what that woman was talking about. And so, what he's talking when Jim Cymbala is, he said, God forgive me for even thinking this direction. But the thing that caught me about that was the fact that this guy heard something he wanted. And so the question I have to kind of end this is twofold. One is, where does that desire come from? Do people have to be at, such a loser place of life in their minds? Like, I'm just such a loser, I need something. Or where does somebody gain the desire to want to get what's being talked about?
It's a mystery, really. I wish I knew the answer to that, because it's amazing to me that there are people in the world that they are unwilling to do something because they think that something isn't going to help, even though it's helped other people. They're not even going to try it. It's like, no, I'm not going to try it. I'm not going to even think about it. I'm not going to even give it a time of day. I'm just going to ignore it as if it doesn't exist. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know what to do with that, to be honest, because that's how a lot of people are when it comes to becoming a Christian. It's funny because I was thinking about doing this, in outreach, as we're talking to people, saying, hi, can I introduce you to Jesus? Just to see what they'll say, because I know what they'll say. No. They won't say, you can't introduce me to Jesus. It's not going to be an argument about whether or not I can actually introduce them to Jesus or not. They're just going to say no, or they're going to say, I already met him. And my hope would be, that there are those people that would say yes. But I think for the most part, people just say they just don't want to. They don't want to because of what it means. It's everything we're talking about right now. You're not going to be able to dumpster dive anymore. You're not going to be able to choose life on your own terms.
And so what does it really take to, so you talked about this transformation that you had, and back to my original inspiration for this, the whole reason I was asked that question in the first place of how come it comes down to things that you're not able to do anymore that you thought or think are fun. It was from my experience. I was telling him the things that I didn't want to do anymore.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that's the thing. And the reason why you don't want to do them anymore is the whole point, is you realize it's just dumpster diving. Whatever it is that they say, well, if I become a Christian, I can't do this. It's like, yeah, but that's garbage. There's so many other things that are far better than that, that you can have in its place, that you don't even need that.
Yeah.
I remember hearing a quote from a Quaker. Quakers they're very, very primitive.
Yeah.
No electricity, no running water, nothing modern, right? And I can't remember where the quote came from, but it was a Quaker speaking to another person who had, I think was talking about, had something to do with not being happy with where things were going in his life, even though he had all this stuff. And the Quaker told him, he said, if you will come and you will live with us, I will show you how to live without all that stuff. In other words, he has a method, a way that enables him to not need any of that, because there's something else. There's something better. It's not just simply learning how to go without. It's like, because he didn't have what they had in terms of their joy, their happiness, even though they're primitive. They're quite happy. I honestly think it'd be quite cool. I'd love to be a Quaker for a little while. I'd love to be, driving around in a horse and buggy and going down to the general store. I think that would be kind of cool.
I like where God saved me a lot more. I'm good.
Well, even though, I used to always tell people that I'm, my dream would be for some construction company to climb a high mountain and then just pour concrete and let it roll all the way down. Every mountain, every valley, every field where there's grass, trees, just let cement flow for as far as the eye can see. Because I really don't have nothing that just doesn't do anything for me to be in nature. Nothing whatsoever. Me being in trees and stuff like that, people, I feel the life, and it's like, I just feel bored. But, when I'm out on the ocean, which is even less, there I feel alive. I feel like I'm in my element. But the idea of being alive is up here. It's not out here. And that really is what it comes down to. And so when I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do the other thing, well, that's because you don't know what this can do. That's the problem. Is you just all you know is what other people can show you. Even like I said before, even as a sinner, my friends would want to go do stuff. They would get high and go do things. And it's like, why do you want to get high and go do things? Let's just go do things, or just get high. Why do you want to get high and go do things? You get high and then you go do things and you forget about being high. So what's the point? We might as well just go do things if that's going to be the case. And it was, so I don't even know how to describe it. Just wanting to act stupid. I mean, that seemed to be the whole goal. It was to act stupid, do things, commit crimes, break laws, cause trouble, whatever. It just seemed to always be, that it had to be this way of having a thrill, always had to be on the dark side, But after I got saved, I realized, wow, you know what? They're desperate. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at people that they've given up on ever being happy in a normal way,
So last question, then we'll close.
Okay.
How do you get there?
How do you get
How
it?
do you get there? How do you get
How
to
do
what
you
you're
get
talking
there?
about? You got this kind of like split path here. Like, okay, I want to go the route of
Yeah.
these miserable, call themselves Christians. I don't want to go the route of just doing what I want and being wrong in God's eyes. But you're talking about a way that seems like I might actually enjoy it. How do I get there?
Well, it's not even it's not even a question that it seems like you enjoy it. You will enjoy it. That's all there is to it, but only if you do it right. And that's the big problem, is you've got to do it right. I counsel people. The majority of the counseling that I have to do with people always has to do with something they're not happy with in this life. I've never had anybody come to me and say, you know what, man, everything's good. I've got a good relationship with Jesus. It just seems like it's taking forever for me to die. That's just never happened. I've just never had a conversation from somebody like that. They've just come out and said, you know what, why is it taking so long for me to die? I'm really struggling with this. So I can get to the ultimate joy. It's just not a thing. It's always, how come I can't have this, and how come I can't do that, and how come this won't work, and why isn't my marriage like this, and why aren't my kids like this, and why isn't my job like this, and why isn't my car like this, why isn't my house like this, it's like that has nothing to do. Those things are not Christianity. Christianity, those things can fit into Christianity, but they're not Christianity. And so how do you get it is when you start saying, you know what, I don't care about any of this. You have to come to that place. I'm glad I got saved at 20 because I didn't have to deal with baggage, like being married, having kids, having money, etc., blah, 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 because all of those things are hindrance before you get saved. But if you can get past all that to get saved and just, okay, everything else is on hold except for knowing Jesus and having him show me what life is all about. Well, then you can start incorporating those things back into your life, and they'll find their place. They won't have to be on the top of the scale anymore. They'll just be a part of what we call living life. But they won't be up on some kind of pedestal, that we worship and try to extract joy from. So you have to be willing to let all that go. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is you have to be willing to let that go. And so the Bible talks about, when Jesus returns, woe unto those that are pregnant, or nursing. And the reason is because of the pressure to have to put Jesus even above a nursing child, and that these are the kinds of things that people can't understand it. And they think, why would God, if he's real, why would he, put those kinds of demands on people? And the issue is, it puts everything in perspective. When God is first, it puts everything else in perspective. And so he has to be first above everything else. Like there has to be that desire, like the homeless guy said, I want what she has.
Yeah. Okay. That's it for tonight. There's an off-topic question we'll ask. That's it for our first segment anyway. And this is just we have one off-topic question. If anybody else has an off-topic question, you can still put it in. But the off-topic question is: do you think addiction is a disease? Addiction to anything, not just drugs or alcohol?
Well, it's an interesting thought because addiction is like a disease. It isn't a disease, but it is like a disease. In other words, the way that it functions is like a disease. So a disease, if you think about a disease you catch, diseases come down from germs, basically, usually germs, or you can be born with deformities and things like that become diseases. But for the most part, they're debilitating. They are, and they can be that debilitation can empower the problem, so it can become a cycle, where things just kind of devolve over time and get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so addiction has the same property. There is a similar thing, and probably should be treated similar in terms of dealing with them. But the idea of my hesitation is because even in the case of real, diseases, it's things that are actual physically, diseases, then it's a there's always a way to deal with these things. And I think that's important to understand, is there's always a way to deal with these things. And so yes, I think the answer to the question is that disease, addiction, I don't think it's really necessary to put a lot of distance between those two things, because the way that you go about dealing with them is very similar. You can get, there's a book, what's it called? Was it The Scarcity Mindset? I think was the name of the book. Something scarcity.
Scarcity brain.
Scarcity brain. Is the idea is that you can get to a point to where, like for example, if you're addicted to a drug, that the pleasure that the drug brings is desirable is not the right word, but seen as more possible. Okay, so getting off the drug can eventually, after a while, can begin to seem impossible. But even though you're going to die from it, it's like, yes, I'm going to die from this, but I can't live without it. And that's the problem is that if I could live without it, then I wouldn't need to die from it. But I can't have my cake and eat it too. So if I can't live without it, then I'm gonna have to die from it, because it's just the consequences, which is the thing, going back to that idea of what I was talking about of consequences, is that's part of the consequences of doing things that are wrong, is that's what happens, is so you have, these addictions. And if you look, addictions are usually, addictions for the most part are wrong behavior. They are wrong behavior, because you don't, even if you like pizza, if you have pizza every day and you can't get enough pizza and you're 300 pounds because you love pizza so much, you're addicted to pizza, it's still wrong. Even though you can look at it and say, but there's nothing wrong with pizza. Yeah, well, but there's something wrong with overeating. And so it's always the case. It's always the case that there's that element is always going to be involved in there of doing wrong.
A comment came in, and addiction is transmissible like a disease.
Oh, I don't know. I would say no. I don't think so. Addiction isn't transmissible. You won't become a gambling addict because you're next to somebody who's a gambling addict. The temptation to go down that road is there, but it's not. It's not the same as far as like a disease where you're if it is a contagious, if you have something like MS or something like that, other people aren't going to get it, by hanging around you,
Yeah.
But there are communicable diseases, and I think it's very similar. A very similar understanding is that they're not communicable diseases, addictions. They're not communicable. Other people don't get them from you.
All right, that's it for tonight. We appreciate you joining, and we will be here again next week. I'm going to probably post this into this along with the next probably several podcasts into a different playlist, so we'll try and put them together, but we'll be calling this I guess, arguments against Christianity unless I come up with something better. But again, as I said in the beginning, if you know somebody that has, a thing against Christianity, we'll call it a an acute argument, something that's more specific, not just this general, circular argument type thing. And I don't like this and I don't like that, but
I would
but
just say
something specific. Yeah. The if you the comment section is live after this. We do get notification of the comments, and if you have an idea, throw it in there. And honestly, we can, if it's something we can build a podcast off, we will. If it's something we can mention in a podcast, we will. And so, like I said, appreciate you guys joining tonight. We'll be here again next week. We do have our midweek service. We always invite folks to tomorrow night to be in person. And if you are in the local area, we'd love to meet you. And if you have questions, you can ask those in person as well. That's why we're here. And so thanks for joining. We'll be here again next week.